The Tesla Model Y has finally landed here in the UK, and it's the model that might become the company's biggest seller. This 54 grand crossover promises all the features of the Model 3, but offers more space, more versatility, and the option to conquer more of what life throws at it. Yes, come on. This is the Tesla that can do anything. It can conquer the road and it can conquer the dirt. Look at this. Woohoo! Will it get stuck? No chance. It's like a rally car for families. So is the Model Y the electric crossover we've all been waiting for? Maybe, but it's not alone. This car now faces competition from dozens of rivals. The Mustang Mach E, VW ID4, Skoda Enyaq, Audi Q4 E-tron, Ioniq 5, Kia EV6, all of which are of exceptional quality. So people's expectations for the Y are going to be sky high. So obviously the ability to do some mild green laning or messing around on sand is going to be the least of people's concerns. What they want from a Model Y is good looks, good range, and good practicality, all of which we're going to tackle in this review, starting with the looks. I think it kind of looks like a Model 3 that's slightly bloated or a Model X that's shrunk in the wash. Either way, I think this is actually better looking than both of those cars. Proportionally, it's just right, to me anyway. Elsewhere, I mean, it's a lot of Model 3 parts that have been crammed onto the Model Y, except at the sides. You've got this black wheel arch cladding down here to give it a more rugged, robust look. Big ride height, just to give it that ability to go off-road if you want. You get the option of 19s or 20s on the long-range version, or 21s on the performance version. I wouldn't want to go any smaller than 20s though, otherwise the wheels start to look a bit lost. Elsewhere, you got a black finish on the cameras, black finish around the windows, black finish on the door handles. This door handle is quite fascinating, to me at least. Watch this, you press it and it pops the door open for you. Make it easier to get in and out. And then this is the big news, a hatchback. That is what customers want because it gives you loads and loads of practicality. Also, look at the way it slopes down like a coupe and then kicks up at the rear. Very sporty. One thing I don't like is this rear section, which looks a bit like a nappy to me. I wouldn't go as far as to call it a diffuser, more like a nappy, but there is a good reason for it. It adds a ton of practicality. Check this out. The Model Y's boot offers around 842 litres from floor to ceiling. It's massive, and it gets even more massive if you fold the seats down using two buttons at the side. Tesla will at some stage offer a 7-seater version, but even this 5-seater spec is practical, with plenty of storage space in small cubbies on the left and right, and a hidden space for charging cables. There's even a sizable underfloor compartment, almost big enough for a medium-sized human being, if you're interested. Meanwhile, at the front, the 114-litre front trunk is also very sizable, bigger than the one you get in the Model 3, although not quite large enough for a person. In the back of the Model Y, it's really, really nice, really spacious. First thing you notice is there is no transmission tunnel, so you can just stretch out back here, no issues whatsoever. Plus, you've got these seat pockets in which you can put a mobile phone, although they're not quite big enough for a large tablet. Plus, this little section here for hanging a coat on, a little light. Also, the size of this sunroof is absolutely ridiculous. I think Tesla do the best sunroofs in the game, and you've actually still got a decent amount of headroom. I'm 5'11" for reference, as well as decent amounts of legroom. These rear seats also recline slightly, so you can actually chill out back here, and you've also got this fold-down armrest with a couple of cup holders. And again, just loads of space to recline. You can even have a sleep in here if you want. The only downside is that it doesn't have any rear heating controls. All of it has to be controlled from the front, but at least you get a couple of USB-C ports. One thing that Teslas tend to get criticized for are their panel gaps, particularly on the Model 3 on the rear boot lid. especially on the versions which come with an electrically operated tailgate. If you push down on these areas, they tend to flex quite a lot, but there's none of that happening on the Model Y. And actually, the panel gaps are quite uniform and I think are perfectly acceptable. There's one area on the Model 3 in particular that always annoyed me, and that was the panel gaps along this front trunk. Quite often you'd see one side with a tighter gap than the other, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. But on the Y, certainly this example, all of this is uniform. Now I wonder if that's down to these Ys being built in Shanghai and maybe the Shanghai plant being superior at building cars. But whatever the case, Tesla, they've always been good at designing cars. Now they're getting better at building them as well. So practicality is good. What is it like up front? Well, if you're familiar with the Model 3, then you're gonna know all about the Model Y because it's basically identical to the smaller car. Almost everything is controlled via this huge 15-inch touchscreen in front of you. It can be quite tricky to wrap your head around, but after a few weeks of using it, then it kind of becomes second nature. How about the rest of the interior? Well, it's available in either black or white. If you go for black, you get a wood grain effect on the dashboard, whereas if you go for white, then you get white seats and a white finish across the dash. None of this, by the way, is leather. It's all animal free, which means that if you're a vegan or if you just, want to be kind to the environment, then this car should appeal to you. In terms of storage up front, there's lots of it. Basically because there's no transmission, that means the transmission tunnel can be used for storing stuff. So in the middle, you've got bags of space, you've got a couple of places to wirelessly charge your mobile phone up here, just below the main screen, and also the door pockets are massive as well. One thing that's very different between the Y and the 3 though, is the ride height. I'm sitting so much higher up, and people who value SUVs or crossovers because of that enhanced ride height are really going to appreciate the extra visibility you get from this car. While I'm on the subject of visibility though, that rear screen is so small. It's almost pointlessly small. It's very difficult to see what's going on through the rear view mirror. Back to the seats quickly. They're fairly comfortable, but one thing I've noticed is that when you try and raise them up to their highest level, they tip forward slightly, so it feels like you're on a kid's slide. If you're vertically challenged and you like to sit as high up as possible, then you might feel a bit uncomfortable because you will be on a slant. Another thing I've noticed is that the suspension is very hard. This car weighs 2,003 kilograms. It's around 250 kilos heavier than a Model 3. And because of that, Tesla have felt that they've needed to stiffen up the suspension in order to increase body control. However, it just makes the car very jiggly. It's not as comfortable or as smooth as a lot of its rivals, and certainly not as comfortable and as smooth as the Model 3. And when you encounter really rough bumps, there's another thing that's annoying. The rear seats make a weird noise. They rattle whenever you go over bumps, and that does get on your nerves.
On closer inspection, it turns out that it was the headrests that were vibrating most. Every lump in the road caused them to vibrate slightly when at their highest setting. But when you lower them, most of that rattling goes away.
One other negative consequence of that extra weight is reduced range. It uses a 70 kilowatt hour battery pack, which can give a range of 315 miles, which is brilliant, but it's not quite as brilliant as the Model 3, which can do 360 miles. So I guess when you're buying the Model Y, you do have to sacrifice range in order to have that extra practicality.
The range is decent, there or thereabouts for the sector, but there are some rivals that offer more. The equivalent Mustang Mach E, for example, will go around 15 miles further according to WLTP figures.
One area where the Tesla Model Y really excels is with its straight line performance. It's so rapid. So right now, there are two versions. There's the Model Y Performance, which will do 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds, which is just, well, it's just ridiculous really, isn't it?
Today, I'm in the Model Y Long Range, which also uses two motors, one at the front and one at the rear. This one does 0 to 60 in 4.8 seconds.
There's just no need whatsoever for a family crossover to be this fast. It's scary fast. Unfortunately, you never really get to enjoy the performance because the suspension is just too firm. I'm sorry, it's too hard. I've driven this car on a variety of road surfaces today, including motorway, around town, and out here on these B roads, and it's always very fidgety, unnecessarily so. The road I'm on right now looks really smooth, but the car seems to be picking up every imperfection in the road. And you just never really seem to get a chance to react because it just feels so busy all the time.
I said earlier that I wouldn't want to go for smaller wheels than the 20s fitted here, but actually 19-inch wheels would be a better bet and improve the ride. The 21-inch wheels on the performance model might be very firm indeed, fine for a sports car, but perhaps not ideal for families.
The other thing that you might want to consider before you buy a Model Y is whether the steering is too responsive. To me, it's a little bit too fast. What that means is that even the smallest of movements on the steering wheel translates to really big movements from the car. You move it an inch and the car seems to fly by about 6 feet in any direction.
This fast steering makes it feel a bit like a go-kart, which isn't so bad around town, but it makes the car feel fidgety at motorway speed. This sort of steering is fine in the lower, more agile Model 3, but steering this sharp in conjunction with the firm suspension results in quite a turbulent ride.
It's just too highly strung, and I don't think there's any real excuse for that. I mean, it's a family crossover. People want to drive these cars and relax. They don't want to feel on edge all the time as if they're in a sports car. Another issue I want to mention is with the accelerator. You might have noticed on some electric cars you have paddles behind the steering wheel which can increase or decrease the amount of brake regen you get. In the Model Y, and in fact all Teslas, you don't get those. Tesla set the amount of regen they think you should get. And I don't know if that's a bit of a mistake, because in a car like this especially, what you notice is that your right foot is always hovering over the pedal and making these tiny, minute adjustments whenever you want to accelerate or slow down. In a petrol car or an electric car where you can adjust the regen, you can sometimes just lift off the pedal and the car will coast for quite a long time. If you lift off the pedal in a Model Y, it slows down really aggressively rather than coasting, which gets annoying.
Thankfully, the Model Y excels in terms of recharging. It has access to arguably the widest, most reliable charging infrastructure, as it can use both the supercharger network from Tesla or pretty much any other network. It will charge at a very impressive 250 kilowatts, which is fast enough to regain 75 miles of range in 5 minutes at a rate of 1,000 miles of charging per hour. And that's quicker than most of its rivals.
A quick word on towing. Electric cars sometimes aren't very good at that. For example, the Audi E-tron is rated at 0 kilograms. It can't tow anything. The Skoda Enyaq is a bit better. That's rated for 1,000 kilograms. The Model Y is pretty good. It's rated at 1,600 kilograms. Now, I'm not the world's foremost expert on towing, but to me that sounds like it could tow a pretty good sized caravan or trailer, or I don't know, a horse and a half. So yeah, pretty decent in that regard. So what's my summary on the Tesla Model Y? On the whole, it's a good car. But what I think has happened is that Tesla have delayed a little bit too long in releasing the Model Y. We've seen countless rivals come on the market and deliver really excellent products. And rather than coming along late to the party and then demolishing absolutely everybody, it seems like Tesla have almost fallen behind in a lot of very important ways. For example, the ride and handling, which are small things, but they are very, very important, particularly to families. So should you buy this car? Well, absolutely. It's got a lot going for it, especially in terms of the range and the infrastructure and the speed of recharging. But bear in mind, Tesla's rivals in many ways are just as good, and in a lot of ways are even better.